Good evening, and welcome to Argonne National Laboratory's virtual OutLoud. I'm Robin Wheeler-Grange, head of state, local, and regional public affairs and outreach, and I'm really happy to have so many of you join us for tonight's forum. Let me begin with some housekeeping remarks to help you get the most out of tonight's event. Your video and audio were automatically turned off when you joined this event. Automated closed captioning is available during this session. If you would like to use this feature, at the bottom of your screen, click the live transcript button and choose one of the two viewing options. If you have questions related to the technology of the meeting, so for example, if you can't hear or see the presentation, click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Send us a message explaining the issue you're facing, and a member of our AV team will respond and help you troubleshoot. Please note that tonight's event is being recorded, and we will make it available to you for viewing post-event. By participating in today's session, you consent to being recorded. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our laboratory director, Paul Kearns. Paul has been with the lab for over a decade. Under his leadership, the lab has flourished, in no small part due to his understanding of the importance of an inclusive and supportive lab culture, where scientific discoveries and breakthrough technologies are generated and celebrated. Paul, thank you for being with us this evening. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robin. Welcome everyone to our OutLoud Lecture. I'm Paul Kearns. I have the honor of serving as the director of Argonne National Laboratory. Since Argonne's beginning in 1946, we have unlocked new science frontiers and solved some of the nation's biggest problems. We accomplished this mission with our world-class community of talent. They represent a wide variety of backgrounds and bring expertise from across the country and around the world. We are committed to increasing all types of diversity across the lab as we build a pipeline for the next generation of science professionals. Critical for this effort is reaching out to communities of people who are underrepresented in our field and who embody exceptional insight, drive, and talent. For these reasons, we are doing more to build relationships in diverse communities. 2 years ago, we opened a secondary location in Chicago with the support of the U.S. Department of Energy and in partnership with the University of Chicago. The focus of our Argonne site is to broaden our contribution to the region's rich innovation ecosystem and drive economic development for underrepresented and underserved communities. Our lab is committed to making its resources, science, technology, and talent more accessible. At the same time, we're collaborating with stakeholders to use science to help solve community challenges. And last year, we established the Walter E. Massey Fellowship, which will support promising early career scientists and engineers who demonstrate leadership in areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You'll hear from our very first Massey Fellow tonight. These initiatives are in addition to our internal work to make the laboratory more inclusive and welcoming for everyone. From hiring to policies to procurement, we are taking a holistic approach to improving our diversity. Tonight, you'll hear from 3 of Argonne's African-American postdocs. They are exploring new frontiers in computer science, applied materials, chemistry, and other scientific disciplines. Each of them represents our talented pool of early career scientists, brilliant minds who are advancing pivotal discoveries and transformative innovations for the nation. I look forward to learning about their research and hearing their thoughts on the power of diversity in driving innovation. To introduce them, we have Valerie Taylor, Argonne Distinguished Fellow and Director of the Mathematics and Computer Science Division at the laboratory. Valerie has over 30 years of experience in computer science. Born in Chicago, she started her career at Northwestern and then worked at Texas A&M as a faculty member of their computer science departments at both prestigious. In 2017, she came to Argonne as a division director. Valerie's research is in the area of performance analysis and the modeling of parallel scientific applications. Currently, she is focused on performance analysis, power analysis, and resiliency. In addition to her research and lab duties, she has co-authored the U.S. Department of Energy's AI for Science report, which is a comprehensive plan to integrate artificial intelligence into many different research areas. Moreover, she is dedicated to making the scientific community more diverse and more accessible. She recently helped write a report on transforming trajectories for women of color in tech. Over the years, she has received numerous awards for distinguished research and leadership, and authored or co-authored more than 100 papers in high-performance computing. Thank you, Valerie, for leading tonight's program. Could you please introduce our panelists?
Thanks, Paul. I'm pleased to be here. As Paul mentioned, I serve as the Division Director for Argonne's Mathematics and Computer Science Division. In this role, I have the privilege of meeting and mentoring bright and talented early career scientists whose research is both fascinating and pushing the frontiers of science. In the 1960s, 3 early career scientists significantly contributed to advances in NASA's space program. These brilliant African-American women, Dorothy Vaughan, Katherine Johnson, and Mary Jackson, did extraordinary work that advanced the research enterprise and did much to keep the nation's competitiveness in terms of the space race of the 20th century. Their stories provide a compelling example of how diversity in science fuels innovation. Tonight, we will have a conversation with scientists of color who are doing research that is addressing compelling science questions and moving the needle on discovery. First, we'll hear from Kevin A. Brown of the Mathematics and Computer Science Division, my division, who is an Argonne Scholar and our first Walter Massey Fellow, as Paul mentioned. Both titles highlight the recognition Kevin has already achieved for his research. Kevin is helping us develop the next generation of supercomputers that can produce faster, more accurate climate predictions and broaden artificial intelligence use across scientific areas. Devon Powers of the Applied Materials Division will follow. He is pioneering the development of solid-state batteries that are high-powered, last longer, and recharge faster. Our final presenter is Thabiso Kunene with the Materials Science Division. He is a chemist who is focused on advancing materials that capture carbon from the environment and convert it into value-added products. They will tell us about their work. Then we'll have a conversation about their experiences as early career scientists, the importance of diversity and inclusion in science, and the opportunities that lie ahead as research institutions enhance their diversity and inclusion efforts. As you are listening to our guest presentations, if you have a question, click the Q&A icon and type in your question. We will address as many questions as time allows during the Q&A portion of the program. Now, Kevin, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Valerie. Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Brown, an Argonne Scholar and Walter Massey Fellow, working in the Mathematics and Computer Science Division. I did my undergraduate degree in Jamaica before completing my master's and PhD in the Tokyo Institute of Technology in Japan. After graduate school, I worked as a postdoctoral appointee for 2 years in the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility, helping to configure our fastest supercomputers. And my current work, which I'll talk about today, is focused on designing the next generation of supercomputers. Next slide, please. Supercomputers are used to enable discoveries across all fields of science, from the nanoscale to the cosmic scale and everything in between. A supercomputer, like Argonne's new Polaris system shown here, actually consists of hundreds or even thousands of smaller computers that are connected using extremely fast networks and storage. It all works together to move and process vast amounts of data to solve big problems, like modeling the climate and discovering new drugs to treat serious illnesses. The supercomputers of today are designed and heavily optimized for the work we need to do today. Next slide, please. However, 10 years from now, the science that we will be doing will change, and supercomputers of today won't be able to keep up to meet our needs. This is somewhat similar to how the road networks in Chicago from 100 years ago would not be able to accommodate the volume of traffic and all the new Tesla cars that we have today. My work is looking at how will climate science and artificial intelligence or AI work change in the next decade, and how should we build future supercomputers to enable the future of science? A future where climate modeling will involve collecting even more data from sensors, covering wider areas and even more accuracy. A future where AI efforts will involve analyzing larger volumes of data using new algorithms and driving discoveries in new fields of science. Next slide, please. This slide shows how my work is getting us to that future. The leftmost section indicates that I'm analyzing the performance of today's supercomputers, looking at both the workloads, namely climate science and AI, as well as the network and storage components of the system. The rightmost section shows what we want to define for the next generation, the new technological capabilities and system designs. And in the middle shows the three paths that my work will investigate. The first path deals with identifying promising technologies that are most likely to fulfill the specific needs of climate science and AI, so that we can encourage future investments in these new capabilities. For example, should we build faster network switches, or do we want smarter networks that may not be as fast, but will allow us to control data traffic in different ways? The second path is to project scientific trends. How will the future work look? This guides us to configure the systems that can accommodate the new types of work. A simple example is, how much storage will we need to accommodate the growth in scientific data in the next 10 years? And the final path is to identify current design limitations so that we can guarantee that these limitations are corrected in future system designs. All of this together will lead us to designing not just more powerful supercomputers, but the right supercomputers. Next slide, please. So from my work, the right supercomputer will have network and storage components that are optimized for climate science and AI work we want to do tomorrow. It will enable better climate predictions that can help us to build safer communities and reduce negative human impact on the environment. It will advance AI so that it can be used for breakthroughs in other areas of material science, physics, medicine, and more. And finally, even though I focus mainly on climate science and AI, we anticipate that improvements brought by this work will help many other fields of science, from the nanoscale to cosmic and possibly everything in between. And with that, I hand over to Devon.
Thanks, Kevin, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm currently a third-year postdoc in the Applied Materials Division. My background is in alternative energy technology and polymer science. During my graduate studies, I fabricated ion exchange membranes for hydrogen air fuel cells and for water splitting applications. And while the work I do now is a noted departure from that history, there are a few commonalities that have carried over. Next slide, please. In particular, fabrication of functional separators has been and still is core to my work. A separator is a piece of semi-permeable material, which means that it allows for passage of only certain species that divides two environments. For example, a window screen allows a breeze and light from outside, but blocks grass clippings and bugs from coming into your office. The materials I work with are designed to have controlled transport or selectivity in a variety of media. For example, I can make a dense polymeric film for water treatment applications. In this case, by controlling the chemistry of the polymer, I can electrochemically isolate specific ions, potentially to recover rare earth metals such as lithium from abundant resources like seawater. Alternatively, I can make porous fiber separators, which have potential use as reusable respiratory protective filters. However, time won't allow us to explore those topics, so while we're together, I'll focus on my work on solid-state batteries, where I make separators that are conductive towards lithium transport. Next slide, please. As for the motivation for this work, I find it helpful to take a quick look at how a conventional lithium-ion battery works. Electric charge through a device is facilitated through ionic transport within the battery. For lithium-ion, like what you might have on your phone, a liquid electrolyte transports lithium ions from anode to cathode. While lithium-ion batteries are effective, they have limitations that are becoming more challenging as the utilization of battery technology is becoming more ubiquitous. Lithium-ion batteries utilize a flammable liquid electrolyte to facilitate charge transport and separate the electrodes with a pore separator. The flammability of the electrolyte creates a safety concern that is currently addressed through design strategies, but is still present in the battery. In addition, over time, lithium-ion can form metallic dendrites, which are wires of lithium that penetrate the separator and can cause a short circuit and lead to thermal runaway of the battery. There's also the issue of energy density, which accounts for the weight of the battery. Because of these and other issues, there's interest in transitioning, in my case, to a solid-state battery, where the key difference is that rather than using a liquid electrolyte and a separator to facilitate charge transport, the two functionalities are handled by a single material. In this case, the solid electrolyte physically separates the electrodes, but is also conductive towards lithium ions, such that the resultant battery is safer since there's no flammable liquid electrolyte present. In addition, the utilization of a solid electrolyte enables the use of pure lithium as the anode, which has a greater energy density and will thus allow for better weight management of the battery. Next slide, please. My role at Argonne is to fabricate various types of solid electrolytes in order to meet the demands of a solid-state battery. We make lithium conductive nanofibers using an electrospinning process where a polymer solution is subjected to a high voltage, which leads to the formation of a non-woven fiber mat, which can aid in ion transport and mechanical rigidity. With the proper fabrication conditions, we can convert the nanofibers into a solid-state battery electrolyte. These electrolytes can take different forms, and one of the interests is in determining how to make them such that they are highly conductive, compatible with the electrodes, and resistant to failure. This work is aided by the facilities here at Argonne. The solid electrolytes are made in the Materials Engineering Research Facility, which include a pilot-scale electrospinning apparatus that allows us to aim towards a scalable process. We're able to characterize the material properties such as fiber morphologies and ceramic crystallinities using the capabilities at the Center for Nanoscale Materials, and we were able to use the advanced photon source to gain a better understanding of the fiber formation process. The point to all of this is that the creativity and expertise of the people that I work with is enabled through access to equipment that allows us to push at the boundaries of what's currently available. Next slide, please. Of course, the outlook for this work isn't only to make these solid electrolytes to have them sit on a shelf somewhere. By properly controlling the morphology and structure of the electrolytes, we aim to develop materials that are long-lasting and capable of fast charge rates while being resistant to dendrite penetration. Not only is this an exciting goal to aim for, it's also one with practical implications for the application areas for these materials. Increased charge rates translate to shorter wait times to recharge an electric vehicle. Resistance to dendrite growth and flammability can reduce safety concerns in portable electronics. Transition to a solid lithium anode, which I didn't touch on too much here, can lead to improved energy density of the battery, enabling use in areas where weight is critical, such as aviation or wearable electronics. This isn't to say that this technology is a silver bullet, but it is an exciting subject area, one that can be a helpful tool in addressing some of the broad challenges that we're facing. Next slide, please. At this point, I would like to pass the floor over to Thabiso Kunene to talk about his work.
Thank you, Devon. I am Thabiso. I have been at Argonne for almost a year now. I received my bachelor's degree from Colby College in Maine and my PhD last year from the University of Delaware. And here at Argonne, my work is focused on CO2 capture as well as conversion into useful chemicals. Next slide, please. And looking at this figure that I have on the slide, we are all reminded of the fact that energy is central to our well-being. And especially here in the United States, I believe that we can all agree that we need affordable, plentiful, as well as clean energy for all our US citizens. But we have to keep in mind that without CO2 capture and storage, we will have to basically abandon most of our fossil fuels that we are currently using for energy sources. Otherwise, the CO2 from these fossil fuels ends up in the ocean, where it is implicated in ocean acidification, as well as accumulating in the atmosphere, where we all know that it is implicated in climate change. Although we can think of some renewable energy sources, such as sunlight and wind, but we all know that such sources tend to be sporadic as well as geographically constrained. For example, in my almost a year now here in Chicago, I think one thing I have learned is that the sun is almost always never there. Thus, you cannot really rely on sunlight as a source of energy in areas such as Chicago. Next slide, please. And to solve this major energy problem, we can look at one of the most overlooked solutions out there, and that is looking back at nature and getting some inspiration. For example, we all remember from high school, from our high school chemistry and physics classes, that the ultimate source of energy on planet Earth is the sun, whereby green plants absorb carbon dioxide from the air as well as water vapor, and use the light energy from the sun to make sugars and oxygen that we ultimately consume for our energy. And these plants also, over millions of years, they decay and end up making the fossil fuels such as coal and crude oil that we ultimately use for our cars as well as powering our electricity system. In short, basically plants take the sun's energy and store it in the form of sugars that are ultimately passed down for human consumption. Next slide, please. Now, my research here at Argonne is basically, again, taking inspiration from this natural photosynthesis, whereby we envision building basically an artificial leaf such that we can also take CO2 directly from the air and combine that with energy from the sun and directly make our fuels of interest. But compared to plants though, this system will be more efficient as well as suitable for places where we cannot plant trees, for example, such as places that tend to be in the desert. Next slide, please. Now, getting to the actual design and chemistry of this system, you can basically think of this system as an empty tank, as I show on the slide, with three main components, whereby the major component is the empty space in the middle that we're going to use for the actual CO2 capture and storage. And then we also show the black triangles, which are the light harvesting components. You can think of that as basically solar panels that are going to absorb the sunlight and then transfer that energy into the red and blue circles, which are the catalyst. And those two areas are the centers whereby we do the actual chemistry of interest. That is taking carbon dioxide, which is just a simple molecule, and using some fancy chemistry to transform that into a useful fuels. And in an ideal case, for example, you will take carbon dioxide and make gasoline that you can ultimately use in your car. Next slide, please. But digging down into how do these so-called catalysts do the chemistry of interest. And since this project is a collaborative project, my research here at Argonne is focused on designing these catalyst centers in the form of what we call isolated clusters. And we target such materials mostly because they tend to be stable for long-term use, as well as they are well-defined in terms of their molecular structure, which allows us to gain atomic level chemical information. And this is advantageous, especially compared to the commonly used heterogeneous and homogeneous type materials. Next slide, please. Yeah. In conclusion, basically, the overall goal of my research here at Argonne is to basically advance our progress towards a carbon neutral economy, whereby we can think of an overall system whereby we can kill basically two birds with one stone, whereby we both reduce CO2 emissions into the environment as well as store energy at the same time by transforming the energy from the sun into chemical energy that is stored in our fuels of interest. And ultimately, this will mean that we are focusing more on stabilizing CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere rather than completely eliminating CO2 emissions from commonly used fossil fuels. And lastly, the success of this project is especially possible here at Argonne because we have access to advanced instrumentation, such as the APS, as well as the very diverse group of researchers who are always willing to provide valuable feedback. And with that, I will take it back to you, Valerie. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Thabiso, Devon, and Kevin for your engaging presentations about your research. It's recognized that the research you're doing is exciting and builds on the legacy of excellence in scientific research established by scientists of color who've gone before you. Now, let's shift gears a bit to talk about your thoughts on diversity in the science field. When speaking of diversity, we include race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, physical abilities, and religious beliefs. However, in light of Black History Month, we're going to focus on racial diversity. As you know, most scientific research is conducted in teams instead of as an individual activity. That's likely been your previous experience as a student and now as a scientist. So would you talk about your experience working with diverse research teams and how that has impacted the scientific enterprise? And so how about if we start with you, Devon, in terms of answering this question?
Of course, sure. I guess I'll kind of briefly touch on the backgrounds that I've experienced in terms of the diverse backgrounds that I've experienced during grad school, for sure, and even in undergrad to some extent. There was a very strong emphasis on bringing people from different backgrounds together. So they're the obvious ones, bringing people from different racial and cultural backgrounds together, but also getting into grad school and getting deeper into research, bringing people with different levels of expertise, different subject matters into close contact so that we can all work on a similar project, try to address different challenges. And so having those diverse, having such a diversity of points of view and of opinions were all super helpful. obvious as it is, towards addressing the research concerns. Let's see. Even if we think just in terms of the way that people approach solving problems, right? I have an engineering background, and so as I work a problem, I'm thinking very much of how do I connect, bolt A to like wire B. I wouldn't connect bolts to wires, just so that everyone is clear. But I think very systematically like that, whereas someone who comes from a chemistry background might think more in terms of fundamentally what's going to happen when you put things together. What are the environmental effects that are going to that we're going to have to consider? And then you can also compound that with the different cultural backgrounds that people bring to the table. And so having all of that, present when we're addressing problems, it's just going to provide greater perspectives in terms of discovering potential solutions.
Excellent point. And it's often the case, those different perspectives, you're learning from each other, which is really great.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Thank you. And Thabiso?
Yes, I agree very much with a lot of what Devon just touched on. But one thing I can say is that in my experience, I don't know if it's a disadvantage or an advantage. I have mostly been either the only Black student or one of two, at most 3 Black students in our chemistry class at both undergraduate as well as my graduate experience. And from that experience, one thing I learned at most is that really one thing I value most about the racial diversity is that we tend to not just be diverse in terms of race, but also our socioeconomic background. And in chemistry, that means the type of questions, scientific questions that you are going to ask are very much going to be different based on your socioeconomic background, because different people have different challenges. Thus, I think one of the key advantages of having a diverse workforce is that different people from different racial background and socioeconomic background will have different perspective on the same problem that you are trying to solve, and ultimately they will come up with different possible solutions as well.
Right. And Thabiso, that's an excellent point in terms of bringing different experiences to bear, because you oftentimes will find a more robust solution by bringing those different perspectives and different experiences, that now the solution that you develop has a wider applicability based upon those experiences. So excellent point. And Kevin?
Thank you, Valerie.
Your perspective.
And I completely agree with my other colleagues here. And I've experienced the same thing throughout graduate school and while working, that having diverse perspectives really leads to richer solutions that are more impactful. One example I can give, and this is not just for the solution, but also in identifying the problems that we're solving. Having a diverse perspective also helps in identifying problems that you wouldn't necessarily see beforehand. I remember once I had to give a presentation to a supercomputing center in a developed country, or rather a developing country. And I've studied in Japan and I've done internships in the US. So it's always been first world countries that I've been working with. Then going to give this presentation in the developing country, I was going to give, my usual spiel of big computers can solve big problems. And one of my mentors pointed out that the problems they're trying to solve there, it's very different from what we're doing in Japan and in the US. So you really want to, think about the work you're doing and see how it can be impactful to a wider range of people in the society. So having diverse views like that helps you to solve problems that are more impactful to a wider set of folks than just what you already have in mind. That's just one experience I've had so far.
Excellent points in terms of learning, having diversity where you can learn from each other, also developing more robust solutions. And Kevin, as you pointed out, having that applicability to a wider range and being also more sensitive and aware of the audience in which you have in terms of the problems or the issues that are to be addressed by that audience, and having that sensitivity about different cultures and different areas. Excellent points. That really shows the value of diversity in terms of the teams. So now let's go to our second question around diversity. And that is, we recognize that many research institutions understand the critical need for diversity in their scientific workforce. However, the Pew Research Center looked at the number of African Americans, Hispanics, and women in the science field and found little gains have been realized over the last several years. Specifically for African Americans, the study found they accounted for only 9% of the STEM workforce in 2019. That's the same proportion as in 2016, highlighting a lack of progress. What do you think these institutions can do to foster environments where diversity and inclusion thrive? And let me just ask the second part as well, and that is also based on your experiences, what have institutions done to retain you and keep you engaged? So a two-part, what have you found that worked well for keeping you engaged? And then also, what do you think institutions can do further to foster environments? So with that two-part question, how about if we start with Thabiso?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
What I can say, just drawing from my experience, I feel like we have to change the question itself.
Okay.
For example, I'll give a short story. So in grad school, I was a teaching assistant for 5 years. So I used to teach general chemistry for non-science majors. And through that experience, over the years, the one thing I realized was that in the first semester class, I will have maybe 20 Black students out of a class of 200 students. So that's a pretty good number. But by the time we get to the second semester of the same general chemistry, there would maybe be 5 African American students. So a large proportion of the students have basically left chemistry at that point. And from that, I think, so now if you think about that decrease in the diversity of the class, by the time you get to PhD, I feel like that was one of the explanations why, at least in my case, I was the only basically Black graduate student in my chemistry department, at least in my graduating year. So being the only person drawing on those experiences didn't really surprise me as much. And thus, I feel like if we want to then increase the diversity of the workforce at places like Argonne, I think maybe we have to think long term in terms of really investing at the high school, basically K through 12 level, to basically increase the talent pool from which Argonne will so places like Argonne will ultimately draw from. Because at least I think at the end of the day, I feel like no matter what we can do at Argonne, if we are trying to retain 1 or 2 African-American researchers, we are not going to move the needle in terms of diversity as much. Thus, we really have to invest at the core of the problem, which is usually in those first few semesters of college. I feel like that's where we tend to lose most African-American students, at least based on my experiences.
Okay, so starting early in terms of looking at environments and what can be done, and
Yeah.
possibly going down to the high school level as well.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent point. And let's see, and Kevin?
I love the point that Thabiso raised about starting early in the pipeline, and I completely agree that it makes a huge difference when we can have outreach activities that build a robust pipeline, as Director Kearns said early in his remarks. And that's one of the things I actually love about being at Argonne, is that the education and outreach team, they have a lot of programs that allow us postdocs and scientists to interact with folks in the elementary school, high school, all the way up to the university, sharing our experiences and helping them. And in fact, one of the programs that is going on right now, the ATPESC, or Argonne Training Program on Extreme Scale Computing, it's an opportunity for students and early scientists to get engaged in supercomputing, even if they don't have any formal training, as I do working at Argonne, where we teach them how to use our systems and how to become, let's say, start being professionals in this field. The deadline is March 1st, if anyone wants to apply for that free training program. So I think I agree with Thabiso in the sense that we need to build pathways to foster an environment of diversity. As it relates to the second part of the question, where retention is concerned, we can't overlook the role, let's say, salary or compensation plays, I think, because there are some people who have to make career decisions based on salary. If Kevin Brown Limited is very prestigious, but he pays 10% less than John Brown Limited, chances are Kevin Brown Limited will only be able to attract people who can deal with living with a 10% less. So in some sense, I think that's one thing that we should always consider, the role that the benefits and compensation, at least the support system for the different diverse set of employees. I have another point to make, but I will leave time for the other presenter.
Okay, all right, and we'll come back, and Devon?
Y'all bring up very, very good points. Like Thabiso, I was also one of, just a handful of Black students, both in my grad school cohort and also in my undergrad graduating class. Like, of the 30 engineering students that graduated, it might have been me and 1 or 2 other people, were Black. But in terms of the actual question, one of the kind of think about it from the other side, right? Where you've been able to attract speaking broadly, marginalized folks into the broader workforce. One of the things that I've seen has been helpful is creating and allowing for spaces to allow those people to just be themselves. So while I was at Vanderbilt, we had an organization called OBGAPS, the Organization for Black and Professional Grad Students, I think. And one of the things that I found very, very comforting about that organization is that when I went there, it felt very familiar in a way that I still can't quite put my finger on. But when interacting with those students, even though I did spend almost all of my time in the lab, the times that I was around those students just felt, almost uncomfortably familiar in a way that, looking back, seemed strange that, being in the lab felt, that made me feel like I was that much out of water. So creating those spaces, I think will help go a long way to encouraging encouraging a more diverse workforce to stick around, because that'll let them know that they're not necessarily alone when they bump into one issue or another. They see some wild thing happening across in the workplace. In terms of the things that have helped keep me around, those types of organizations have helped, but also having some degree of recognition of what I'm able to do from my superiors can't be understated, right? Like having a professor who you have loads of respect for, like say to you straight up, hey, you had a good idea, we should do that. Especially when people coming into grad school or into professional environments are dealing with different degrees of imposter syndrome, having somebody who's established, who knows what they're talking about, say to you, hey, you're right about this thing, can do a lot to lift their confidence and again convince them that maybe they should stick around, and maybe any other difficulties are minor compared to what they might be able to do if they stick with the rhythm. Anyway, Kevin, you had another point that I'm curious to hear.
So am I. So if we turn back to Kevin.
Actually, Devon, that was the exact point that I wanted to make, and I'm glad you made it probably more eloquently than I could have. So awesome.
All right.
Right. And so that it has to do with having organizations where you have students or colleagues in those organizations that have common backgrounds. So then you don't have to explain your perspective. You can talk about things from that common experience base. And that does make a big difference. I had such organizations as well. And adding to this discussion, I wanted to ask too about role models, because that becomes important. And I just want to share one thing in that perspective, because when I started as a faculty member, as a Black woman faculty member, I realized I had never had a Black woman faculty member before. And so, it was very different in that experience. So if we could just elaborate too a little bit about role models. And I think the three of you are exceptional role models in terms of the science that you're doing with batteries, also carbon capture and supercomputers. So it becomes really important. But just want to hear what you think about role models, and then we'll also go to questions, the Q&A as well. So we'll start with you, Devon.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't want to cut anybody off. So like you, Valerie, there have only been a handful of, of Black male professors that I've interacted with. But I remember one of the first was when I was at Trinity back in San Antonio, back when I was a wee lad. My heat transfer professor, Dr. Terrell, and I wasn't quite surprised seeing a Black man teaching a college course, but it was a reminder that we belonged there. Because not only was he there, teaching courses and running things, he also had a research program that he had going, and he had students that he was working with. Just like the other established, chemistry faculty and biology faculty, he was there doing the same things. And it kind of reminded me, and it showed because I was like 20 at the time, but it also reminded me, hey, these things that you're trying to do, there's somebody else who is doing this exact thing. Maybe you don't want to follow that exact path, but look, you can do it. So yeah, that was really, really cool to see.
Thank you. And Thabiso, if you wanted to add.
Yes, I can just say one of my really biggest influences is still my undergraduate advisor. She is an old white lady, but one of the things that really inspired me from her is that she almost through my whole 4 years, she will go out of her way to make sure that I'm doing well, like my classes are going well. Like if I need a break to go somewhere, maybe like she would just go out of her way to make sure that I fit well and things go well beyond just academics. So I think to a certain extent, maybe the role models can go beyond just being people who you share a racial background with, but basically being somebody who's just gonna go out of their way to at least try to learn more about your, let's say, your racial and socioeconomic background. At least
Yeah.
I found that very useful.
Right, role models and mentors are so important. So excellent point, Thabiso. And Kevin?
Thanks. One of my role models is someone who's actually never finished high school. And the reason that person is a role model is because it's the dedication they put into whatever they're doing. And I use that as an example as how I want to be when I'm working. So I think it's really great to have role models who inspire you to be better than yourself, not just to follow the path that they've gone down, but to improve upon yourself in whatever way you want to improve upon yourself.
Thank you. And let me just say thank you, Devon, Kevin, and Thabiso. Your discussion has generated quite a few questions from our virtual audience. So let me take a few questions from the Q&A, and just want to remind everyone to remember to ask questions, to click on the Q&A icon and type in your question. And just to note, if you would like to ask a question that someone has already submitted in the Q&A, please use like the existing question so that we know it is important to several people. So we will address as many questions as time allows. So here's our first question from the audience, and that is, do you have any suggestions for how we can nurture and identify talents that reflect our diverse world from our hierarchy of education in the US and other countries? So that is looking at nurture and identify the talents. So, and let me just see, I'll start with Kevin.
Thank you, Valerie. I love this question because I think if we want to identify and nurture talents, we should create opportunities for people to be themselves and follow the path of, let's say, least resistance. Let them show what they can do instead of forcing them, using standardized tests per se, instead of evaluating them on this uniform metric. This may vary for different people and different talent, and I'm not an expert I'm not an educator in that way to give examples on how to do it, but I think this is a good approach in allowing us to identify talents, and then we can figure out how to nurture them.
Excellent point. And let's see, Devon, and let me just check it. Devon, if you want to answer.
All right. The thought that crossed my head as Kevin was talking is that there is a strange grace in failure, right? Sometimes you might try a thing that just doesn't work out, but the way that you handle those problems, those barricades, can also help the people around you recognize what you are good at, right? Maybe you had a hard time doing work in a chemistry lab, but somebody might realize, oh, you're actually really good at programming or at computing. So let's introduce you to that subject area and see how you do. So in terms of something that's a little more actionable, creating to go back to what Kevin said, creating opportunities for people to try different things at all levels, right? Both in terms of at the K through 12 level, but also in colleges and grad schools, and even to some extent in professional environments, giving people opportunities to try different things, to try to learn new skills, to see what they're good at, to see where they kind of fall short, so that they can be continually growing their skill set. I think that would help in like nurturing people's talents, especially talents that they don't know that they have.
Very true, because sometimes you evolve or adapt and learn about your talents with different situations. And Thabiso?
Building on what Kevin and Devon just said, I think, let's say, for instance, let's say as an employer or as an lab director or positions like that, I think you should be ready to be disappointed in most cases, especially because I really believe that being racially diverse, it also means that the experiences are different. Thus, what you as a person in a leadership position, your expectations may not necessarily coincide with somebody from a minority background's experience. Thus, I think to really make sure that you retain talent and you support people, I think one of the first things to do is just be open-minded and be ready to get disappointed, at least at first try, until basically your experience and your your workers' experience sort of match at some point.
Right.
If that makes sense.
So it's a constant learning process.
Basically, yeah.
Right. Some things may work out and some things may not, and things that may not work out is a learning experience.
Yeah.
You learn from that, and it's also a growth experience. So yes. And then I think we have time just for a quick question. So I'll ask you for short answers to this one. And that is, based upon your experience, what advice would you offer to underrepresented STEM students as they consider their career paths? So I'll ask for short answers. I know you have much to convey. So how about if we start with Kevin?
I would say, understand that the path you need to take may not necessarily be the conventional one. So be open-minded to take that unconventional path and follow opportunities to where they may lead.
Okay, thank you. And Thabiso?
Well, I will just say my personal motto, which is work hard and be nice to people. At least I think people are always willing to help you and give you advice. You just have to give them a reason to go out of their way to do so. And I think just being nice, that has worked for me so far.
It goes a long way.
Yes.
Thank you. And Devon?
I would say go for it. I know that that's easier said than done in a lot of cases, but if there's something you want to do, and especially if you have the opportunity and you're able to twist things to make it happen, go for it. And then try to work everything else as you go, but just take the shot.
Thank you. Excellent advice. Great. So our time has run out, but I want to thank our presenters for this informative and engaging conversation. I really enjoyed it. I also want to thank our audience for your thought-provoking questions. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. And now I'll turn things back to Robin.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, panelists. Really interesting, great presentations. Your science is fascinating. Thank you so much. And a special thanks to our virtual audience for your contributions to this very important conversation. This event has been recorded and it will be emailed to you for listening again and for sharing with your colleagues and friends and family. Our next Out Loud lecture will be held on Thursday, April 21st. So keep an eye out in the next coming weeks for an email invitation with additional details. We hope you enjoyed your virtual visit with Argonne this evening. Stay safe and good night.